Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Crossings online service. My name is Andrew, and let me just wish you a happy Father's Day weekend to all of you dads and those of you who have played a dad-like role in someone's life out there. Now, recently, I was reading a book on Andre Agassi. It's his autobiography. It's a book by the name of Open. And I don't know about you, but growing up in the 90s, Andre Agassi was a big deal. He had some of the most iconic commercials as I was growing up with Nike, Mountain Dew, American Express. He was the greatest tennis player in the world. He is known for his great hair, rebellious attitude, his great work ethic. I mean, in the 90s, Agassi was the epitome of success. He had fame, good looks, wealth. You see, for Agassi, on the outside, everything looked fantastic. But you see, what you learn in his autobiography is during that same time, Agassi, he was holding on to a secret. It was all an act. It was all a lie. You see, in the 90s, Agassi had created a life where everything looked good on the outside, but inside, his life was falling apart. His look was a lie. He was actually bald and played tennis with a wig. His swagger and attitude was all an act to hide his insecurity. He secretly was depressed and struggled with drugs and alcohol. In fact, there was a quote that I love from the book. Agassi sums up his life by saying this. He says, "Success doesn't change the inside. It only shows you the cracks more clearly." And so for Agassi, it took a long time for him to realize there was something broken in his life. This pursuit of more, it was killing him. More endorsements, more money, more grand slams, more fame. It was a lot. And he finds out that he was not actually made to continue to go after more. And so this book, Open, is a fantastic read because it gives us a window into his belief. And honestly, a belief that most of us hold, that more will make us happy. And I'll tell you, that belief, it almost destroys Agassi's life. And it impacts probably every single one of us today. You see, most of us deep down, we believe that more of certain things will actually make us happy. My kids right now, they love two things in life, dessert and video games. And they truly believe if I would just give them more of these two things, they would be eternally happy. And so they're constantly asking me, "Dad, can we have just a little bit more dessert? Dad, can we have a little bit more screen time?" Because they believe this is what it's going to take for them to be happy. And my kids aren't the only ones who fall for this. My first job I got was at a grocery store. I was bagging groceries. I was paid, get this, $5.25 an hour. And for the first few paychecks, I thought, whoa, this is amazing. Until I found out that cashiers made $5.75 an hour. And then something happened inside of me. I wanted more because I thought, well, they get that, then I'll probably be happy with that. So more is what I need to be happy. And so today on this Father's Day weekend, I want to talk about this lie that we believe more will make me happy. More money, more Instagram followers, more likes, more success, a house with more square footage, more horsepower in my next car, whatever your more is. And I can promise you, you have a more. We've probably all heard that stat about people winning the lottery and not making anyone's life better. You've heard that, right? You know, the classic one. There's this study that was done, it was years ago now, but it found that people who win the lottery aren't actually any happier than people who don't. In fact, people who win the lottery actually experience less everyday happiness than people who don't. Now, I know when I hear that stat, I'm like, oh my gosh. But if you were to offer me a winning lotto ticket today, I'd take it in a heartbeat because somewhere deep inside of me, I still believe that more will actually make me happy. Now, if you've been with us, we've been in this series called Generations. And you know, we've been talking about a guy by the name of Abram. And today we're going to look at a great story that, honestly, it doesn't get talked about very much. See, on the surface, it seems kind of ordinary, but as we peel back the layers, we're going to find a story of a family in crisis, a family that fights over money, and a story of heartache and heartbreak. And it can all be traced back to this little idea that many of us carry, that more will make me happy. So if you got a Bible, let's jump into Genesis 13. And if you don't, that's okay. You can always follow along on the app. But as you turn there, let me give you a little context for our story. You see, last week we met Abram. God spoke to Abram. He called him to leave his community to follow God, and Abram does, and Abram's nephew goes with him. Now, as time goes on, Abram and his nephew, a guy by the name of Lot, they experience a lot of success. They get a lot of financial gain. They both accumulate lots of flocks and herds, and that means more employees, which leads to even more growth over time. So over time, both of these guys become incredibly wealthy, which sounds great to many of us, because we assume as they get more, they're going to be happier. But in fact, it actually leads to conflict. Genesis chapter 13, verse 5, we find, it says, "Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's." You see, Lot and Abram, their employees, they begin to fight because they all want more. You see, apparently these guys, they didn't grow up in the 90s, because if they did, they would have heard from the notorious B.I.G. that more money, more problems, right? Now, of course, we all know more isn't actually bad, is it? More can actually do some good. More money can help people. More fame can bring attention to specific causes. More influence can change the world for a better place. More can do a lot of good. In fact, Proverbs chapter 10 says this. It says, "The blessing of the Lord brings wealth." You see, money can do a lot of good in our world. And our church experienced this last week. I love that hundreds of you stepped up to a financial need in our community. I mean, when we shared that there are 9,000 kids in the Newport Mesa area that come from low-income families, which means that these families struggle with things like buying clothes or shoes for kids, and that's a huge challenge for those families. I loved seeing how many of you stepped up and said, "You know what? I can bless those families in need." I love that hundreds more of you will step up this week. You see, having money, being financially blessed by God, it is not a bad thing. But more of anything can bring more problems, more conflict, and more fighting. In fact, recently I read a story about a guy by the name of Frederick Ward. He was a pretty successful guy, passed away a few years ago at the age of 91. And when all of his assets were sold at the end of his life, his net worth was right around $500,000. And so when it came to the reading of his will, Frederick gave virtually all of his money to his kids. And then he left his adult grandkids just $50 each. Well, the grandkids, they did not appreciate it. They believed that they deserved more. And so they went to court and sued their parents. And for 2 years, these sides fought a contentious court battle over the will until eventually the grandkids lost. And so not only did these kids not receive any additional money, but they had to pay over $200,000 in legal fees. You see, money can cause a lot of tension. And that's what we're about to find in the story of Abram and Lot. They're workers, they begin to fight. And we see this word quarreling. Now, this word, it carries the idea of a growing frustration, of an argument that starts little, but it's starting to build over time. Let me give you an example of this. If your spouse constantly throws their dirty clothes, not in the hamper, but next to it, you've probably experienced this. You know, at first it's like no big deal, but after a few weeks, you're like, what's wrong with this person? How can they keep missing the hamper? And then after a few months, you start making those passive aggressive comments. And after a few years, maybe you start believing things like, oh, my spouse doesn't care about me, or our home, my spouse is so selfish. You see, what happened is just over time, this little tension, it built. That's this word quarreling. It's the idea of a small frustration that continues to grow bigger and bigger and bigger over time. And so Abram and Lot, that's what they're experiencing. It's exactly what Agassiz said. As they increase their portfolio, as their business succeeds, this tension arises. This crack is revealed inside of their family. And so the question becomes, how are they going to respond? And you see, from here on out, we're going to see two separate responses that reveal two different hearts from both Abram and Lot. First, we see Abram. Verse 8, it says, "So Abram said to Lot, 'Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left.'" Now, this is a huge deal for a couple of reasons. The first is, how easy would it have been for Abram to ignore this? I mean, let's be honest. Most of us are experts at ignoring conflict, especially when it comes to our families. I mean, maybe you got a family member who's always making those passive-aggressive comments, and instead of confronting them, what do most of us do? We just ignore it and hope that over time it'll magically get better. Or maybe you got a cousin who's always borrowing money and never pays anyone back. And everyone's secretly angry with them, but no one says anything. You see, so often in conflict, we choose to ignore it, but Abram here, he moves towards it. And not only that, his response is surprising. You see, in that culture, whenever the older person is in a conflict, they would get first choice in a moment like this. So in theory, Abram could have gone to Lot and said, hey, get your stuff out of here. You go find your own spot. I'm older. I'm in charge. I'm taking the best land. But what do we see in Abram? He's got this desire to not only confront the issue, but also to be gracious and sacrifice potentially financial gain in order to keep a relationship strong. I mean, this is as rare today as it was back then. Because you see, back then, like now, most of us, we carry this belief that, the thing that's going to make me happy is more. More is going to make me happy. But you see, Abram's different. He's playing by this different set of rules. And so he goes to Lot. And he makes this incredibly generous offer. He says, Lot, you can choose the land moving forward. And so verse 10, we find Lot, he looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. Now this is before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan. He set out towards the east, and the two men parted company. See, Lot, he looks around and he sees, oh man, this land over there, this is so good. I know what's going to make me happy. It's that land right there. And so he chooses that land. So he goes, and we get clues right away that this is going to be a huge problem for Lot in the future. You see, first we see that this land, it is by Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, those were two cities who back then were known for being full of evil and darkness, oppression and violence. I mean, these were cities where people did unspeakable things in them. Lot says, you know what? I'll go live right there by those cities. So we know this is probably going to cause problems for Lot. On top of that, we even find in this text that Lot sets out towards the east. Now, in the book of Genesis, east not only represents a direction, but it also represents moving away from God. For example, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, they sin against God and they are banished from the garden and they go east of Eden. After Cain kills Abel, he then moves farther east from Eden. That represents moving farther and farther away from God. And then in Genesis 11, the backdrop of this story, after God sees the pride and arrogance of people, we find that they are continually moving east, meaning they are moving farther and farther away from God. You see, east is a direction, but it is also symbolic of making choices that lead us farther and farther away from God. So what we find from Lot here is his decision to go after more. It's not just a decision for financial gain. It's actually leading him farther away from God. And before we judge him too harshly, most of us, if we got really honest with ourselves, we've probably made some pretty big decisions in our past for more that have actually led us farther away from God. And we, like Lot, have probably missed a lot of warning signs and just assumed, you know what? The thing I need is more, because more will make me happy. In fact, I had a buddy a few years ago who worked for a great church and had a great role helping people, making a big difference. But if you know anything about working at churches, you know that often churches, they don't pay the best. And so this guy, he just grew more and more unhappy with his pay until one day a company came around and offered him a lot more money, like a lot more. Now, this company did have a bad track record of how they treated employees. The hours were terrible. The staff culture was bad. But this buddy of mine, he was just convinced, more money was the key to my happiness. And so he made a decision. And within a few months, he regretted it deeply. This is Lot right here. He makes a really poor decision. He ends up living in Sodom and Gomorrah, a place with a lot of violence, a lot of evil. And honestly, Lot and his family, they suffer for it. He loses friends and family members. Eventually, he has to flee from there for his life. He loses all his power, all his wealth, all his money. It wrecks his relationships with his family. I mean, he's never really close after this moment with Abram. Lot loses a lot to gain just a little bit more. You see, Lot is this cautionary tale of what happens when we believe more is the thing that will make me happy. It's like Agassiz in his biography. He serves as a warning. If you build your life trying to accumulate more and more and more, it's going to leave you broken and alone. See, that's what happens to Lot, and it almost is what happened to Andre Agassi. You see, at his breaking point, Agassi, he made this discovery. You see, for years, his life was all about how can I get more? But he hit this moment where everything shifted for him. And I don't have time to go into details of the book, but you see, when Agassi, he became a dad, he began to realize, I don't really like the person I'm becoming. And he looked back at this life he had created, trying to manage his image, trying to accomplish more. And he decides something's got to shift. And so he began to move this mindset away from what can I get towards what can I give. And if you know anything about the second half of his life, you know that Agassi has found so much more joy and purpose in his life because instead of trying to create an image, instead of trying to get more and more and more, he's focused his life around what can I give? And I'll tell you, the same is true for many of us. See, for the vast majority of us, the happiest, most joyful moments of our lives are moments where we invest what we give away. This is what sets Abram apart. He has this unbelievable generosity about him. See, when it comes to conflict with Lot, he chooses to act graciously and give to Lot. And this isn't like a one-time thing for Abram. His life is marked by generosity. In fact, in chapter 14, he meets a prophet and priest of God. And after this pretty amazing moment, Abram makes this really generous, really massive decision. It's found in Genesis chapter 14. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the tithe, but this is where it comes from. Abram is the first person to give a tithe back to God, 10%. And in our day, people, they look at the tithe and they think, oh man, God is trying to take all this money from me. But for Abram, giving is just what gives his life meaning and purpose. Because you see, what he realizes is God has given him so incredibly much. And so Abram decides, giving sacrificially to you, God, is something I want to do. And I'll tell you, this theme, it gets repeated throughout the entire Bible, that when they realize how much God has given them, they make the decision. I'm going to tithe. I'm going to give a tenth. I'm going to give sacrificially because God has given me so much. I mean, if you're new to faith and church, you need to know we have a God who loves to give. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 29 says, God, he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. 2 Timothy chapter 1, for the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, to the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. And of course, the most famous verse in the Bible, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. Whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. You see, great lives are always lived and marked by giving, by serving. One of the things I always think about on Father's Day weekend is, some of you know my story. I grew up without a dad. I had a mom who did an amazing job. I'm so grateful for my mom. But my life, in many ways, was marked by an absence of a dad. And one of the things I'm so grateful for is there were men who stepped up and gave generously to me. See, growing up for me, I was a huge baseball fan. But money was always really tight in my family. So the idea of going to a professional baseball game when I was a kid was totally out of the question. But one of my neighbors, this dad, every year he would invite me to go to a ball game with him and his son because he just knew it would mean a lot to me. And you know what? It did. Or I remember a friend of mine in high school. His dad invited me to go fishing with him and his son because otherwise I wouldn't have anyone who would invite me to something like that. I'll tell you, some of the most impactful moments of my life came because of people who chose to give. And so now as I get older, I want my life to reflect this giving heart. It's because it's a bigger part of my life because of how people have given to me. And so this week, we got an opportunity as a church to give. I mentioned this earlier, but we are in a season right now where we as a church have a chance to give back to families in need. There are families in our community who, as they approach the next school year, are going to need brand new shoes for their kids. We have a chance to give. At the end of June, we have a huge opportunity to bless kids with a home in Cambodia. And at the end of June, I'm going to ask you to step up and give. Why? Because we have to? Nope. But because we get to. And I hope you jump into these opportunities, and I hope you jump into others of giving with your time and giving with your resources, because giving makes a huge impact in the world around us. And so today, as we close, I want to say a huge happy Father's Day to all of you who have played a dad-like role, because here's what I know about you. You've given greatly. You've given of your time and resources. You have served and blessed kids and the next generation. And that right there reflects the heart of God. Let's pray. God, we thank you because you are so good and gracious. And so, God, as we come before you today, we thank you for everyone who's played a dad-like role, everyone who's given sacrificially. And today, God, we thank you because of you, who has given so much to each one of us. And so, God, we thank you for your son, Jesus. And as we have opportunities to give in this upcoming season, God, let us respond joyfully because of how you've given to us. We love you. We pray this in your son's name. Amen.